Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments. So I keep getting asked this question, Sean, what is your opinion on the market for big box PC games? Now to be fair, how I define big box PC games are pretty much computer games that came out for IBM PCs or IBM PC compatible machines towards the late 1980s all the way up to and through the late 1990s. So when we get to around the year 2000, that's where pretty much I put a marker in the sand and I say if we're going to talk about big box PC games, really the market runs from the late 1980s all the way up to the late 1990s. That coveted era that gave us Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, the TurboGrafx-16, the Sega Genesis, and the Super Nintendo. That's the era that I'm going after when I talk about big box PC gaming in this particular video. I know some of you may agree with that definition. Others of you may also like to include mid and early 80s computer games in this particular same collecting category. I personally disagree with that because when we start talking about games for the Atari 400, the Atari 800 or XE computer system, or the Apple II series, or even the Commodore 64, Commodore 128, that particular market is what I consider to be part of the pre-Nintendo video game and computer market that basically entered into a massive speculative bubble during the years 1995 all the way up to the year 2005. Well, most of those markets have been hammered at present time because a lot of people that are collecting both computer games and vintage video games are going after Nintendo items and later. They're going after Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Neo Geo, TurboGrafx-16, Sega Saturn, and the like. They're not going after Atari, Intellivision, and ColecoVision. On the same side of the proverbial coin, a lot of computer collectors out there, rather than focusing on Commodore 64, Commodore 128, Apple IIc, Apple IIgs, and your Atari XE systems, a lot of computer collectors are going after big box PC games from the coveted IBM PC and IBM PC compatible era that pretty much took the market by storm in the early to late 1990s. The market for Atari, Commodore, and Apple II computers and games has been weak. Now, there are exceptions to every rule. I know if this video gets enough views, I'm going to hear about it in the comments section. For instance, let me use this as an example. I owned an Apple IIc growing up because the school district I went to, Boyertown Elementary School, if you want to look it up on Google, pretty much catered to Apple II computers at the time. Again, I'm 43 years old. So I went to elementary school pretty much in the 1980s. Hate to admit that. Well, ironically, I got hooked on games like the Bard's Tale series, the Ultima series, and even one of my favorite games of all time, Mystery House. Well, today, if you log on to eBay and you look up what the going rate for a complete inbox copy of Mystery House for the Apple II series systems, you're going to see that it's going for about $1,500. Well, a couple of years back, that game was going for $2,000 or more. So ironically, that game actually fell in price over the last couple of years. Now, there are some exceptions where certain Commodore, certain Atari, certain Apple computer games did go up a little bit in value over the last 5 to 10 years. But those are exceptions. They're not the rule. That market really hasn't had much momentum to it because a lot of people, especially in today's day and age, they're going after factory-sealed Nintendo games or WATA-graded video games or TurboGrafx-16 games and the like. They're kind of ignoring a lot of the coveted Atari, Apple, and Commodore computer era that came to be in the 1980s. Now, I don't think that side of the market is ever going to experience a comeback anytime soon. But ironically, when we talk about what's happening right now in the market for big box PC games, meaning most of these games that were produced for IBM PC or IBM PC compatible systems in the 1990s, the market's buzzing along right now. I mean, we have games like Darkseid, Fallout 2, ID Anthology or ID Anthology, depending on how you pronounce it, the Space Quest series, even Mortal Kombat that was made for the IBM PC, believe it or not, is selling for a premium on the market at present time. Some of my favorite games from this particular era, because I was very much active in this market back in the 1990s, are games like The Seventh Guest, The 11th Hour, Phantasmagoria, Myst, Rise of the Triad. I know there's a lot of people out there that did like Rise of the Triad when it first premiered. Another popular game that came out during this time was Descent, Descent 2. Those are great, great classic computer games, in my opinion, that all hailed from the 1990s when we were buying these games at Babbage's, Electronics Boutique, Computer City, or even CompUSA. Now, the market today is much more fragmented than what it was back in the 1990s. And the reason for that is, today, as I sit here, I can go and I can play a lot of these classic games directly on Steam, where all I got to do is set up an account, I can buy these games, and I can play them anytime I want. The average person who is going back and collecting these games from the 1990s, and some of them have gorgeous box art, some of them came with excellent, excellent secondary items in the packaging. I mean, they were incredible. A lot of people who collect this stuff really have nostalgia towards these items. However, the average person that is born after the year 2000, that is a computer gamer, that fancies themselves as a classic computer enthusiast, chances are in the next 10 to 20 years, they're not going to be going out in the market and trying to buy a 486 DX system or one of the first Pentium systems that came out in the market from Packard Bell or Hewlett-Packard or Dell to try to play these games. Most of the people are going to log on to Steam or any of these other platforms, and they're going to purchase and or download these games and just play them on their current computer system that they have in their homes. This is why the market for investing in these items is extremely risky. You know, guys, I get a lot of flack on this channel from a lot of younger collectors and a lot of younger speculators who haven't been in the greater antiques and collectibles trade for any great length of time to understand that trends change. If we would get in our DeLorean time machine and we would go back to the 1990s, and let's just say the internet as it is today and YouTube existed at that time. Right now, if I would be doing a market report on the antiques and collectibles trade, I would be telling you that vintage toy marbles are extremely collectible, cast iron mechanical banks are extremely collectible, Pez dispensers are extremely collectible, and Atari, ColecoVision, and Intellivision video games and systems are extremely hot at present time. Now, we get back in our DeLorean time machine, come to today, present day, and we look at the value of those items in the secondary market, and you're going to learn something. Almost all of those items are pretty much down 50% or more in value on the secondary market. Well, back in the 1990s, people were quote-unquote investing in those items for the long term. I remember I was selling a lot of this stuff on eBay, and I used to get into heated arguments where I would tell people, you know, if you want to give me $150 for a quote-unquote near mint Intellivision system with 5 common games, I'll sell it to you. But if you think 20, 30 years from now, people are going to covet that item, you have another thing coming. All trends in the collectible side of the trade eventually pass or dissipate over time. Collectibles are linear, antiques are cyclical. If you want to invest long term in the antiques and collectibles trade over a period of 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you should be in the antique side of the trade. Not sitting here trying to put your money in Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, vintage video games, big box PC games, Pez dispensers, vintage toys, or vintage comic books. Those markets are inherently risky because of the amount of change and the amount of speculation that happens in them. You know, in a lot of my videos, when I talk about coins, currency, artwork, historical documents, first edition collectible books, traditional antiques, antique furniture, antique glass, I can literally hear my audience start to go off to sleep because they consider that subject matter boring. The reason why those markets are boring to most people is because, number one, they're very sophisticated markets that you really have to take the time to study. You need a lot of patience, you need an understanding of the market, and you really have to analyze the trends in those markets. But number two, there's very little speculation occurring in the realm of the rare coin marketplace, or the antique furniture marketplace, or the market for vintage antique bottles at present time. Those markets are completely free, almost, not entirely, of speculation and in some cases market manipulation. A lot of the people that want to manipulate these markets and make a ton of money in speculation and collectibles, they're going after vintage video games, Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, vintage toys, all these other markets. That's what makes a lot of these collecting categories extremely risky. People are only looking at the money that they can make. They're not looking at the money they may lose. And that's what's going to hurt a lot of speculators in these markets. So what's my analysis on big box PC games? It's a great hobby. If you have the money and the means, you want to go after the originals, you understand that 10, 20, 30 years from now, people are probably not going to be clamoring for original 1990s computer games, then by all means, enter the market. But please do not call it a quote-unquote investment. It is not an investment. Now, if you're out hitting the flea markets, yard sales, garage sales, and you're getting this stuff below value, and either you're keeping some of those games for yourself or you're flipping them on the secondary market, that's where you can make money on this market. But please don't think that some of these computer games that are selling for a couple hundred or a couple $1,000s at present time are going to continually always go up in value over the next 5, 10, 15 years. In fact, the market trend is really with people who are heading the tailwinds saying, hey, this market at any point in the future is probably going to turn on the dime. So that's my analysis on this market. I hope this video has helped you. Please leave me a comment. Let me know whether you like this video, whether you agree with my findings, you disagree with my findings. And please, if any of my content that I produce is helpful to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks, guys, and have a great night.